Thank you, everybody, and welcome to the Collaborative Leadership Huddle. I'm Craig Ross, excited to have you join us this morning, this afternoon, this evening, wherever you are in the world. We have several folks from around the world joining us. Excited about that because we've got a very important topic to discuss. I'd like to start our huddle with a quote that has always meant a lot to me, but now means something even more. You probably recognize it, Maya Angelou. There's no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside of us. Well, a couple of weeks ago, with George Floyd's tragic death, the story inside of me all of a sudden changed. And how humbling to discover that the story I've thought I want to get out to the world is actually incomplete. And in some ways, even a bit wrong. And the significance of that stopped me. Several of you perhaps read the blog where I realized that I am the system. It was, in fact, my knee on George Floyd's neck. And so I reached out to a Veris Global advisor, dear friend of mine, Dr. Andy Piccioni, who's actually on the huddle with us as well today. Very excited about that. And I said, Andy, you need help. I need some direction here. I need some counseling and some counsel. And she shared and introduced me to the amazing DeEtta Jones, who's going to be joining us here in a moment for what I believe is going to be a tremendously, not just productive, but important discussion. With that, of course, our Collaborative Leaders Huddle, always sponsored by Veris Global, where we believe organizations that are not aligned fail customers and employees. And so we work to quickly align, of course, teams and organizations to their imperatives so they can consistently succeed. Part of that, of course, at the heart of collaborative leadership, at the heart of alignment, is diversity, equity, and inclusion. Can't accomplish that without DE&I. And so that's why our discussion is so important today. I'm, of course, Craig Ross, Veris Global CEO, proud to have the honor and privilege of hosting this huddle. I'll be joined today by the one and only Sherilyn Jane, who's our moderator, also plays an important role of fielding your questions. Say good morning, good afternoon, Sherilyn.
Hi, everyone. Thanks. If you've been here before, you know that this time goes really quickly. So submit your questions. If you want everyone to see them, post them there. Or if you want it to remain anonymous, just send a chat to me privately and I'll read that for you.
Thank you. Thank you, Sherilyn. And now it's my pleasure to introduce DeEtta Jones, founder, principal, of course, DeEtta Jones and Associates, who's been working a lot in the last 3 weeks, 12, 16-hour days, having discussions with executives around the world, just like the one we're going to have. And so we're incredibly honored. And given the discussions that I've been having with DeEtta, it is really exciting for me to open up the conversation because DeEtta brings a voice to this that is profoundly important, and as I told her offline, does it in a way that doesn't make me feel less of a person, and gives me hope and confidence that the role that I play, both as a family member, community member, and a leader of a business that serves many around the world, that I can be even more effective. So I'm excited to have to bring DeEtta to you and encourage you to do your part to join this conversation through the chat space. With that, DeEtta, please say hello to the Collaborative Leaders Huddle.
Hello, everyone. Great to be here with you.
And DeEtta already knows we're going to jump right in with our big question, the question that I'm looking forward to answering. How do we find our leadership voice in the face of racial injustice? DeEtta, what's the answer to that?
Absolutely. Don't start with your messaging. So the question is about voice. What I'm going to encourage you to do is not start with your external voice, what you say to other people about yourself. I'm going to ask you to start with your internal voice. Have a conversation with yourself first, and a really tough and important conversation. And here are a couple of things that I'm going to invite you to think about. One, I want you to identify the ways in which you have, whether or not you feel that you have personally perpetuated any injustice at all, either enabled its ongoing existence or have benefited from its presence. That's one. Two, ask yourself, why now? Did you care about racial injustice, and were you actively seeking to end it 3 weeks ago, more than 3 weeks ago? If not, just think about the fact that the voice that you're going to bring forward right now is going to come across as potentially something that people might not think is authentic. So think about where you were 4 weeks ago and what you were doing then. The fourth thing, I'm going to ask you to step forward and listen and actively not recenter yourself. This moment in time that we're in is not about you. It's not about how you're feeling. It's not about you asking people to help you think through your feelings of guilt or shame or vulnerability. This is about listening to the lived experience of other people and understanding what the real situation is and how it is that we can shift power dynamics. And then number 4 in this list is don't ask Black people to teach you how to be anti-racist right now. Black people have our entire lives learned how to navigate to varying degrees of success in white dominated spaces. And so what we're asking right now is that you take time on your own to learn and or unlearn the things that are associated with anti-racism. That's the first thing. The messaging, what comes out of your mouth next, that's important. But unless you do that important self-talk, the rest of it is going to be hollow.
DeEtta, thank you, and I really appreciate, no surprise, coming with those points. And one of the mistakes I made in our first conversation is I asked you the question that you said we shouldn't be asking. And I really appreciated your direct response. It was again, a humbling moment for me, and it was really, Craig, do the homework. This is not a Black issue. This is a white issue. And after that, of course, doing the homework, getting the books, reading, taking a deeper dive. And yet, one of the questions I asked you that I'd love for the network here to benefit from, really being vulnerable here, there's fear inside of me. I'm responsible for many lives of families, just within our business. Our business must succeed so that we can support families. I make a mistake as a CEO in delivering a training. If I make one mistake with something I say, there are consequences for that. And yet I know that if I stay quiet, I'm modeling the same behavior as those who are apathetic. And so what counsel do you have for me as it relates to the fear that I'm facing in terms of speaking up?
Yeah, be brave, be vulnerable, practice, and surround yourself with wise counsel, right? Do your work and partner. Actively seek proximity to people who are going to help you and give you honest feedback about not just what you're saying, but how you're being perceived by ears and experiences outside of your own. That's going to take proximity. It's going to take authentic relationships. And it's also going to make it necessary for you to have people who you consider peers who are different from you. And so if you are an executive of an organization and you do not have people who are different from you culturally and racially, who sit next to you at your C-suite meetings, now's the time to really rethink whether or not that is going to be in your best interest going forward, because the world is shifting in a very significant way. And so being vulnerable and being brave is not just, that's a temporary situation. It's going to be, people are going to start holding us to be much more accountable for being able to speak up and to know what the right words are, and to make sure that when we do make mistakes, we're able to pivot and then move forward with a clear plan of action.
Yes, well put. Thank you for that. Cheryl, I'm going to be coming to you and seeing what we have from our chat space from the network as a question. I'll make a final comment on DeEtta's point there as you pull that question for us. I think what you just said, DeEtta, is really critical, is it comes down to getting over ourselves. As you mentioned in your answer there, that perception of how people perceive me, and getting past that and doing what's right, exploring, learning transparently, and being clear about our purpose and intention in doing so. I appreciate that counsel, DeEtta. Cheryl Lynn, questions from the network here. What do we have?
Yeah, I did get one that wants to remain anonymous, so I will just read it. The question is, I'm not a leader. I don't have authority over other people. So other than voting, what can I do to change systemic injustice?
I think the same principles that I started with about that self-reflection apply to any of us, regardless of whether or not we have a titular leadership role. All of us have, this movement that we're going through right now is global, but because I was born and raised in the United States, I'll use that context for this moment. Every single person who was born and raised in the United States has been taught racism. We've been taught white supremacy. Right? When you look around and you look at your buildings, when you look at the language that we use, when you look at the way that we prioritize either skincare products or what beauty looks like, all of those things are choices that we make on a day-to-day basis and that we also drink in as part of our own acculturation experience. So you don't have to be a formal leader in order to be able to say, what is it that I personally am either doing or can do differently in order to make space for other voices, to be an advocate, to be brave, and also to practice anti-racist behaviors in my own life and family with my circle of friends and as I work with my colleagues in my organizations.
Thank you for that. Cheryl, I'll come back to you in a moment. I've got another question for DeEtta. One of the things that I'm very clear on myself, DeEtta, and again, sharing my truth, is the number of times as I look back on my life that I've allowed microaggressions, comments that don't sit well with me, that reveal racism and such. And I'll no longer allow that. And one of the solutions I found that is I can actually lean forward and ask someone, tell me what you mean by that. I can be responsible in addressing that. Tell me what you mean by that. What additional counsel would you have for, in this case, I'm white, and so I'm asking from that bias. When I'm working during the course of a day and I experience racism, either I'm seeing in the system, in the way, in the process that we're doing something, or in a microaggression, a comment from a colleague, in addition to leaning forward and saying, what do you mean by that? What else can I do?
You can, and you can let people know that not only do I see it, but also it's not something that is okay with me. We can have specific asks. I think we need to ask people for what we want. And so, Craig, you said that and it offended me is one thing, but Craig, you said that, and here's what the problem is with that. And my ask is that you never say that again. I'm explicitly asking that as a white man to another white man because it comes across to me as racist and oppression, and I am not. I am expecting that that is not where you're coming from, but if it's coming across that way to me, then I'm sure then it's going to come across that way to other people. We have to step forward and end oppression where we see it. The other thing is when we think about our systems, when we look at systems, a lot of times in our systems, and I'm going to say systems are oftentimes ambiguous for people. That's a big word. Right? And so in our systems, I really encourage you to think about where bias actually lives in systems. And every point at which a system has something that's called objective or neutral, there's probably bias built into it because somebody built those criteria. And also every point in any system, hiring, onboarding, promotion, any system that again has a touch point where humans have to intervene, there also is going to be bias. Because even when it's about applying objective or neutral criteria, humans use our filters to think about what and interpret what those criteria look like in action. And so again, really saying, let's make sure that we're pulling back, we're not jumping too quickly to come to agreement, that we take an equity lens as we look at this question or as we really make sure that we're bringing as much kind of equity to our processes and systems. But it means that you constantly are saying, let's not jump too quickly to closure and shared agreement. Let's make sure that we're understanding and coming to shared agreement about definitions and expectations. And let's make sure we're applying an equity lens at as many points as possible in our processes and conversations.
Yeah, this might be very early in the process here, my insight in an instant, this idea of it's not about me, and let's not try to be centered in this moment. The essence of change, of course, is that dissonance. Is that leap where I'm going to be uncomfortable and stepping into that? That's really, and then again in your answer right there in your words, I'm getting that even deeper. I want to ask you about we know, of course, D&I, diversity inclusion. I think a lot of the folks in our huddle here, the collaborative leaders, they understand that, but more we're hearing the case for the E, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Um, Following your guidance, I took a deep dive on that in last week and wanted to understand more the importance of the E. I've got an anecdote for that, but I want to ask you first, what is the importance of the E and why do we include that in our conversations?
The E is because equity is different than equality, right? And in many of our values frameworks, we talk about equality, but we know in practice, equality doesn't actually play out as such. And so equity is a concept that we've been working on. The tricky part is as far as the way that we've actually tried to apply equity in practice in many of our organizations has been that what we've done is set up this reinforcing kind of subservient relationship against the power structure. So people who have traditionally been marginalized or underrepresented are now because of equity, are trying to, and it's a deficit-based model of equity, are trying to constantly say, can I please get access to a system that was not built to allow me to be successful, right? And that's the way we've been doing equity from a deficit-based model in many of our organizations for the past 50 years. The way that we are now reconceptualizing equity in 2020 is the system itself was not built to allow for all of us to have access, right? And it has barriers, historic and legal barriers that have kept people from being able to fully participate and benefit. And now the tricky part, and so when you said step forward and feel like I'm not losing anything, the tricky part is some people have benefited from the fact that equity doesn't truly exist, while other people have been disenfranchised by it. And so now sharing or creating equity feels like a loss to those of
Okay, DeEtta's frozen there for a moment. She'll return, I'm sure. She's got me on the edge of my seat, so she must return. There she's back.
Oh, there
Thank you, DeEtta. Froze for just a moment. I've got a follow-up on that, DeEtta. Thank you. And it was an aha that I had. And it's to your earlier point that it's the system. We talk system. It's not like you can. It's fuzzy. It's not right there. And yet we're a part of it. I was as a white person, I was raised and had mentors, and I would ask them, "How do I become successful?" And more than once, I heard, "You're going to become like the 5 people you spend the most time with." And
Right.
So, Craig, spend time with successful people. Well, guess what? As a white person, all those people were white people. And so if all the white people are spending time with other white people, I mean, it's, to me, am I accurate? It's an example of how subtle this is and how purposeful we must be in rethinking what is success and who am I spending time with? And are these people who share the same values and are achieving successful outcomes the way that are consistent with what I believe is important? Am I on track here?
Yeah, it's subtle to white people. The rest of us can see it very clearly.
Okay.
Right? And so what the rest of us are saying, we need mentoring champions or advocates or allies. And the tricky part is that we need champions and advocates and allies in these formal programs, which are part of this deficit-based model of equity. How is it that we create access for people who otherwise wouldn't have it? Because people in privileged positions have other folks who say, let me take you under my wing. You remind me of myself when I was 24. Oh, I went to Duke, you went to Duke, right? So other folks, a lot of times white folks have kind of a natural kind of integration, access, removal of barriers, connection to networks, where the deficit-based model of equity is we have to create special programs and go out of our way in order to help people from historically underrepresented backgrounds have access to those.
Excellent. DeEtta, we've got a freeze there again, and I just want to share that this is helping me find my leadership voice. I hope it is well for our Huddle as well. Sherilyn, I'm going to come to you with questions from our network there's DeEtta's back. What questions we have from our network, Sherilyn?
There was one question just as it relates to equity. And then I want to go to Joseph Black if he wants to ask his question or a statement. How do you measure equity?
DeEtta, do you want to take that? How do you measure equity?
I say it one more time. Say it one more time. I turned off my camera in case that helps with the internet access.
No problem.
Yeah, yep. How do you measure equity?
So what did you, so measure equity?
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah. How do you measure equity?
You measure, it's tricky to measure equity. And it has to do with thinking about where it is that we have to actually create standards. The tricky part is that in many of our systems, the way that we've approached equity in the past has been about representation, and it's numerically driven only. We absolutely have to have quantitative ways to measure equity. So representation against, you know, the communities that we serve, or our audience, or our clients, or our local demographics is one way to think about being able to create more equity. But it's also up and down our hierarchies, right? To think about who we have in our senior leadership roles and what does that look like demographically. But it's also about people being able to have ease and access as they navigate through our systems. So equity is something that is so, inequity is so built into so many of our systems that actually measuring and being able to have integrated ways to measure and sustain equity is going to take time. So there's not a perfect, simple answer for that question.
Mm-hmm.
That requires a strategy. So if for those of you who are really serious about saying, how is it that we're going to integrate long-term sustainable solutions that are going to be demonstrable and measurable into our organization and our culture, it's going to require you to put into place a strategy for doing that.
And by the way, DeEtta's too humble to share. That's one of her organization's area of expertise, by the way, right there. And so if you're in need of that, I'm sure DeEtta can continue that conversation. I want to make that clear. Sherilyn, did you say Mr. Joe Black had a question?
Yeah, I liked your question about filters. So if you want to unmute yourself and ask your question to DeEtta.
And by the way, Mr. Joe Black, you're a friend of mine and tremendous human being and influence in my life as well. I would not, I'm not going to let him speak without people knowing that. Joe, what do you got?
Greg, first of all, it's good to see you, and thank
Good
you
to
for
see
the offer to be a part of this conversation. And also, DeEtta, thank you for your time. As you were talking a little bit earlier, a thought was running in my head around the difference between ordering one with filters, which we know we all do, we all must do, to individuals to see the difference of normal values and the difference between that and influencing and flavoring the way you are filtering life.
Right, right. So we all have different filters, and I'm reading your comments and I appreciate you bringing it up, because a lot of times people say, well, I just wasn't taught that way, but that doesn't mean I'm racist, right? So here's the big thing. Most people would say, non-Black folks or white folks would say, I'm not racist. Got it. The tricky part is it's hard to not be racist in a society where that has so much racism kind of built into its fabric. That's really complicated to do. But racism is different from filters insofar as it is associated with power dynamics, right? So to the extent that I have more power and or more privilege, whether or not it's formalized privilege, but it's access to resources, it's the benefit of the doubt, right? It's people being automatically afraid of me or having preconceived notions when they look at me because of my skin color. That is the difference between filters and racism. And racism is not just about overt acts. You don't have to be burning crosses on someone's front lawn in order to be racist. Racist is kind of looking at people and saying, well, I think this person is a little bit more articulate or well-spoken, or this person has more of a pedigree like my own, right? And a lot of times, again, those are filters, but when I channel them through the fact that I have been taught that people who are like me, and I am not Black or I am white, are better or superior or better positioned or come across as more professional, and it has implications on other people, that is racism.
Yeah, I heard this term, modern day racism, and that really stuck with me, because I you know, you study history, you grow up thinking about racism as something else, somebody else is doing that, and the realization that as a part of the system of which I am, that modern day and those filters and how we perceive things becomes really critical. There was a question, Sherilyn, I saw it go by from, I think the name was Christine. Can we go there next? There's a question about facilitating similar discussions
Yeah,
with.
Christine Wolf, if you'd like to ask your question, you can unmute yourself.
Christine, are you able to unmute?
Christine.
Sherilyn, go ahead and read her question on behalf of Christine. Would you mind?
Yep. Oh, she said 1 sec. I think she's
Okay.
maybe finding it.
That's great. I think this is a good one when I think about some of the questions that we're fielding at Veris Global from some of the leaders we're supporting. Christine's question represents that. That's why I wanted to call this out. Go ahead, Christine.
Sure. Thanks. Hope everyone can hear me now. It took me a second to get my headset plugged in. Thanks, DeEtta, for everything you've already shared today. I'm in a position in my organization where I'm in a middle management position, trying to have conversations with my staff to generate ideas towards what we can do better, acknowledging what we haven't succeeded with, and also trying to then bring that upward towards more senior leadership, getting commitment to making changes, setting metrics around a longer term commitment to making changes. Where I think staff are interested in some sense in having conversations about how they're feeling, but I think there's a real desire to see what we're going to actually commit to action on. And I will say that, you know, I've started some of these conversations with my staff with an acknowledgement that I, as a white person who does not have professional expertise dealing with racial justice issues, like I'm not actually in a position to even lead these conversations, but just because I'm uncomfortable doesn't mean that we shouldn't be having them, right? So I've been trying to you know, acknowledge some of my own shortcomings in leading these conversations, but I wonder if you have any other suggestions, either as someone trying to facilitate these conversations and then actually bring about action from there. So any advice you have to offer will actually be very helpful as we continue these conversations as soon as tomorrow.
Yeah. So the first thing I'd have to say is I'd love to be part of your team, Christine. You sound like a really amazing person to work with. And it's the thing that you did was you said, we have to have a conversation about this. I have had conversations with thousands of people across the globe in forums just like this over the last 3 weeks. And many of those have been Black employees of major corporations all over the world who have said, my manager hasn't even brought this up yet. And I know it's because they're nervous. Right. And so the fact that you just stepped forward and said, we have to have a conversation, I'm not professionally trained in this area, is a huge first step. The second thing is to concretize this is to be able to say, maybe one of the things that we can do is first have kind of a listening session. Maybe we should, as a team, just sit and have 30 minutes or 45 minutes carved out to just talk about what's going on with us. What people are experiencing now between the racial equity movement and COVID is traumatizing. Right. And so just being able to kind of have a space to discuss and explore and know that there's a space for that is a real honor for people. And I've been doing a lot of it and I know people are receiving it well. The second thing then that you can do is say, now that we've talked about some of our kind of feelings, let's also try to figure out how we channel some of those feelings into actions. What are some of the ways in which we might start to identify the work that we do? For example, if you're a manager, the work that we do, and maybe look at that with kind of an equity lens, right? And so if we have processes that are related to how we develop products, how it is that we create criteria, how we measure the success, how we communicate with clients, let's identify 4 or 5 different areas and maybe start thinking about some of the streams of activity associated with that work that we explicitly are responsible for, and then brainstorming, where is it along at what point in the path is it most likely that equity issues or racial injustice might actually show up in these processes? And you can actually start to concretize it with people by saying, what is our work? What does the path look like? Where is it most likely that inequity or injustice might show itself? And then what are some of the action steps that we might do to either dismantle or to kind of lessen the negative impact of bias?
Brilliant. And DeEtta, I'd like to, I see a possibility in further equipping Christine here, and I want to know if this resonates for you. And again, everything you just shared there, very clear, and I know that's going to serve a lot of us. One of the things that, for those that work with Various Global, they know we're fond of saying culture initiatives fail because they're culture initiatives. As business people, we all have a number to deliver. There's a project to get done. There's something to get to the customer. And that's ultimately oftentimes what I'm most of you often measured by. And so you and I have had some side conversations about this DE&I work, that it can't be separate. And in fact, the research is really clear that those teams that are more diverse, that have greater rates of inclusion, they're actually outperforming those that are not. And so what can we do in these conversations if I face a peer who says, all right, I get it, there's racial injustice, yes, we need to do the politically correct thing. What can we add to that conversation that says, you know what, this isn't just the morally right thing to do, it's actually better business, we're gonna be better for this. In other words, that for us there.
Yeah, absolutely. So what's happening right now, I really appreciate you saying that. What's happening right now is a major cultural shift. Racial injustice is the one thing that we're focusing on right now, but you're right, this is cultural. And so making sure that people understand that culture is connected to our strategy, and our strategy is held together by our systems. And what we're talking about right now is the opportunity to revisit our systems in the service of our strategy, in the service of our aspiration or our vision, right? And so connecting the dots for people is really important. And that the way in which we're experiencing this racial injustice movement right now is about, the problem is the gap between our espoused values, right? If we're thinking about culture and the famous iceberg analogy of culture, the espoused values, those values that we say about ourselves, that we tell our clients, our customers, and then the way people are actually experiencing them inside of our culture, whether it's the United States or what our company, right? And the gap, the significant gap between those two experiences, our espoused values and values in action, that's the rumble. And so our job right now is to try to lessen that gap. And so how do we do that? We surface what our actual values are. We concretize the shared definitions of those values, and then we translate those values into actionable behaviors that are not just how we normalize our behavior, but that inform our systems and structures and processes. But the simple metaphor is strategy, structure, culture, right? That's the simple connection. This is not a standalone, and this is not a one-off. It has to be kind of helping us understand that this is about a transformation that is going to be the way in which our business models are going to have to be informed in the future.
And an additional way we can make that actionable, I'd like to offer, if I find myself in a situation where I do not have authority, positional authority over others, is I can actually ask that question that DeEtta's just outlined for us. What is the connection between what we're talking about here and our performance as a team? What is the relationship between our strengths and ability to honor diversity, create inclusive cultures? What's the connection with our strategy and with our performance in the business? We can actually ask those questions and facilitate that conversation. Thank you, DeEtta. Sherilyn, other questions or comments from our network here?
Yeah, I wanted to see if Kevin Giroux would like to ask his question. I think it's great because it relates to the young folks. Kevin, would you like to unmute yourself?
Like myself, yes.
even younger,
Okay.
the next couple generations.
Okay. Kevin, are you live there? You mute off?
Can you hear me now?
We
Yeah,
can. Thank you.
Okay, great, thanks. Morning, Craig, Sherilyn, DeEtta. Thank you again for doing this. Been participating in these for a few sessions now, and I really enjoy them. My question was, so my wife and I, we've got two African American boys that we're fostering. So this is more of a personal question than a professional one. And one of them, they're 6.5 and 4.5. One of them's been with us for about 4 years, the older one. The younger one's just starting to transition into our home. You know, this is what's happening right now, transpiring right now, has been the biggest fear of ours for, the last, 4+ years. And I'm just wondering, and someone was Christy was having a private conversation with me on the side, and she gave me some, really good things to think about as well. But, I was just kind of curious, it was something that we knew we were going to have to do eventually, right? But when you think about it 4 years ago, and now we're getting to this time where we think that, obviously with things that are going on, probably the right time to start having some of these conversations. One is, what are some strategies or some ways to start having those conversations with them that's going to be, you know, more at their level, obviously. And two, you know, now that it's really, you know, happening, or the time that we want to do it, we absolutely feel less prepared than we did, you know, 4 years ago when we said, yeah, we know that we're going to have to, you know, talk about these kinds of subjects with them.
Yeah, good thing. I just put in the chat a blog post that I wrote because I too I'm the parent of a Black boy, and it's terrifying. There's no question. You know, as overwhelming as it is for me as an adult, I can only magnify how I feel because I'm a parent. So here's a couple of things. There are some really wonderful books and resources that are specifically for Black children. One of them is from an author called Ibram X. Kendi, and he writes quite a lot about anti-racism. And I know so far we haven't used the language anti-racism a lot. We've been talking about diversity and inclusion, but anti-racism is what you want to talk to your children about very explicitly, because racism is the topic that we're talking about right now. I understand that there are a lot of different types of oppression in the world, and I want to end all of it. But right now, what they need to understand is what we're experiencing right now is racism, and explicitly towards Black folks in the United States. That's the topic right this minute. So they need to have language that allows them to know that you know that what this is and why this is important. It's also important for them to see themselves in the books that you share with them, or the movies that they go to, or the heroes that you describe, or the posters that they put on their wall, and not in ways that are just stereotypical. I'm married to a professional football player. So I understand how stereotypes go with that. But I don't stick posters all over the walls of only football players. I stick posters on the walls of all sorts of amazing Black men and women who have done all sorts of other things, because I want my son to see himself and see himself portrayed in many ways. The protagonists of the books that you choose are really important, right, to read to your children. And so just thinking about that sort of thing, and always making sure that you're just bringing that kind of lens. And I can follow up with some resources, because there are wonderful resources that are specifically about teaching children about race and identity in ways that allows them to see themselves and people who look like them centered and as heroes.
No, I'd love that. I appreciate it. Yeah, we have three children that we've adopted, and then we're fostering the two, and two of them are Asian. One of them is Hispanic as well. My wife's Hispanic, so I'm actually the minority in my family.
Awesome. Good for you.
So, but yeah, and we've dealt with, especially my oldest daughter, she's Asian, and we've dealt with some, you know, some racism and stuff like that that's happened over the years in school, and, you know, kids are, you know, they can be mean and that sort of stuff. And we've tried to teach her, but I would assume that the resources that you're referring to would be applicable regardless of the race, right? Like, it would just be good lessons that okay, good. No, I'd appreciate anything you can share.
Absolutely. It sounds like you have a Josephine Baker lifestyle going on there, which is brilliant. But it's also important that children see themselves and
Right.
have a voice for their identities.
Kevin, you're demonstrating why you're such an effective leader. It's because you're such an incredible person. Thank you for speaking up. I want to add a resource because I did follow DeEtta's directive. Craig, do your homework. Get it done. Answer the question yourself. My wife and I are really getting a lot of value out of Raising White Kids. It's the name of the book, Raising White Kids by Jennifer Harvey. I just wanted to add that as another resource for those of us that are raising white kids. And the subtitle is an important part of this because it says in a racially unjust America. And so what does it mean to raise our 4 kids in a racially unjust America? We're getting a ton of value from that. So yet another resource. DeEtta, I want to come back with a question that we actually discussed offline. Again, I got a lot of value from it. I hope our network will as well. Those of us, those in the network who know Verus Global, it's about ultimately moving forward. It's about ultimately identifying what you stand for. And so I'm making this transition from not being racist, and then we're hearing this transition to being anti-racist and the importance of that. Yet Mother Teresa's counsel, of course, is to march for what we stand for, not for what we are against. And so I asked you offline, I'd love for our network to benefit from that. Help me make sense of that, what appears to be a conflict, but it might not be so.
Absolutely. So I really appreciate this question, because anybody who's ever worked with me knows that I am all about aspiration. And I know that humans are more motivated by aspiration, about what the possibilities are, about creativity and the creation of the possible. The tricky part is, and I describe this as kind of similar to the way that motivation works, right? If you think about motivation, if this is the middle, right? And a lot of times we think about how do we motivate people to do their best? We think about what the capacity is that they have for being motivated. Well, none of that really applies or works, all of that intrinsic motivation and tapping that, unless we deal with these things that are down here that are called hygiene factors, right? And so hygiene factors, if something is broken, if people don't have an appropriate living wage, if people feel like they are in harm's way, if they're being harassed at work, then those are hygiene factors that are called demotivators. And we can't motivate people to do their best, to bring their all, until we deal with the hygiene factors. That's the exact same thing that we're talking about now. It's dealing with racism and oppression at the systemic level so that we get it out of the way. We dismantle the things that are keeping people from having the ability to even get to the point where they can aspire, right? And so this is about it's not about stepping back or walking towards fear. It's instead about dismantling things that are keeping people from giving to this baseline so that we can then fully aspire and then fully leverage, all of us.
Well put. Thank you so much. Valuable for me. Sherilyn, we've got just enough time for one more question or comment from the network here. Do we have one?
Yeah, I have one that was sent anonymously. The question is, what is the most beneficial action companies can take to benefit Black communities they service?
I don't think there's one. I think that there are a number. And I think that the major question right now is kind of, especially for leaders, as the people who actually have kind of titular leadership authority, is, and this is a complicated question, how do we simultaneously dismantle racism, right, within our systems and structures while also building a new and better world and or company? That's a simultaneous ask, right? Both of those things have to happen at the same time. We don't want to dismantle and then be standing in the ashes, right, without having a place to go. But we need to figure out how to do that in ways that are significant. So I think that this is a moment for leaders to step forward in more than just words and to say, I get it, I'm going to name it, I understand it, and we're not taking it, right? And we're going to outline a committed path forward that says, these are the actions that we are going to take near term. These are the actions that we are committing to long term. These resources and the support and the sustainability is not going to go away when the news cycle change. And also that we're not going to just rebuild what we had in the past, right? We're not just going to say something's broken, let's just rebuild it, but we are actually going to step back and recreate and co-create with people who are bringing different lived experiences and have been historically marginalized to the table to think about what it is that we are trying to build together in a way that allows for that sustainability and that shared ownership. But that's a process over time. And so again, that's the strategy work, but it's going to create more, it's going to require more than just words. It's going to require commitment, action, a plan, and resources.
This is a follow-up to that. And I don't know if this is a comment or a question, DeEtta, I'll let you decide. As we've had discussions with several of our clients, some have made some comments that they can tell what their CEOs are putting out as messaging has been washed and scrubbed by, of course, the communications departments, by their legal team. By the way, those CEOs, obviously white males. And so what counsel would you give those CEOs? Because there's the system, right? It's got to be scrubbed by communications, got to be scrubbed by attorneys to make sure that the organization's not vulnerable. And so they're right up against it. Maybe you've answered that question. Maybe this is just a comment. I'd love your thoughts on that.
No, I've answered that question a lot of times, and I've gotten it a lot of times. And I've said to people, don't let your communications get in the way of your communicating. This is not about your comms department. Your comms department is going to make it really generic. They're going to make a non-statement. Don't do that, right? So absolutely seek wise counsel, but practice, and then dig deep first. And then say, you know what, is what my comms is advising me to do actually in line with what I know to be necessary to be said? And if it's a non-statement, if you don't talk very directly and very crisply about naming what the exact issue is that people are describing right now, name it explicitly, state, we are not having it, here's what we're going to do, here's what you can expect, here's what you can hold us accountable for, right? If those things are not part of the messaging, don't bother. Then just say nothing. You actually put yourself in a less vulnerable position by saying nothing. And by the way, saying now is not the time to say nothing either. Right? This is the time to say something, but make sure that you really think about what your comms department is supposed to do and what you're supposed to do as leaders.
DeEtta, I knew it would happen. I knew it would be rich. I knew it would be inspiring, and I knew it would be meaningful. We're going to come back here in just a moment, wrap things up with sharing our insight in an instant. I'll be asking everyone to participate that in the chat space. Resources, additional resources, and by the way, in addition to the resources you see here, I'm going to ask DeEtta to say a few words about an exciting program they're launching. In addition to that, when we send out the link that has this recording for everybody that's enrolled, I'll ask the team to also include those resources that DeEtta was speaking about. So we'll make sure that those are available to everyone as well. DeEtta, a few words about this exciting program that you have coming up.
Absolutely. So the Inclusive Managers Toolkit is a program that actually we launched about a year ago. We've put thousands of leaders across the world through it. And it's because we understand that the sticking point for actually creating the kind of inclusive organizational cultures that we want is leaders and managers. We are the touch points. And so instead of making equity, diversity, and inclusion its own separate topic, we slapped it right inside of here's as a leader and as a manager, here's your job, all of the different aspects of it. And now let's talk about how you bring equity related practices, behaviors, tools, and structures to it. It's a 10-week program that, again, we put thousands of people through, and it's 10 weeks intentionally because it's not just about a lot of content and tools, but it's actually constant coaching. So we sit and have coaching sessions like this twice a week where we can kind of wrestle with the concepts, wrestle with the practice, wrestle with the applications in real time. And so we absolutely encourage you to reach out to us. And also, if you are interested in equity, diversity, inclusion, anti-racism strategy in your organization, let us know. We do quite a lot of that.
Excellent. Thank you, DeEtta. And with that, with the next Collaborative Leadership Huddle is actually in September, and that's not 2 weeks away. Difficult decision for those of us at Verus Global to make. We started the Collaborative Leaders Huddle at the beginning of the pandemic, when we had to all retreat to our homes, work from our homes. And it was our method to bring the network together, to connect with one another. As things begin to loosen up, if you will, in business, so is the demand for our time at Verus Global. And so in our responsibility to our network, our customers, we're having to prioritize our resources that direction. But we will continue the huddle, and they'll become even more valuable. We commit to that. In fact, we're exploring the idea of having a panel, experts like DeEtta and others coming together and expanding upon this. So very excited about that. Please stay tuned. We'll look forward to having your participation in future huddles. With that, insight in an instant. I'm going to ask Cheryl Lynn to share hers first. The rest of us can put those in the chat space. What was the most meaningful insight? Something you were reminded of, something you heard that was incredibly valuable for you that you'll use moving forward? Cheryl Lynn, your insight in an instant.
Yeah, my insight is that you know, to be a leader in an organization, you have to go first, and you have to be uncomfortable. And so, you know, for me, I avoided these topics because I didn't know the right thing to say, which was actually hurting. You know, that's not helping. And so I personally, you know, need to have those conversations. And DeEtta, you've given us some really great resources to start those. And in that self journey, you know, to be able to, I think for me, it's just, it's just to go first, to not be afraid.
Excellent. My insight in an instant was actually brought forth in the first few moments. Get over yourself, Craig. This isn't about being comfortable right now. This is about actually being uncomfortable. It's about stepping into what appears to be a chasm, avoid the unknown. And because it's not about me, and that's so consistent with my values, That's my insight in an instant. Take the focus off myself and put it on others. Thank you for that, DeEtta. DeEtta, your insight in an instant?
The insight is that there are a lot of amazing folks all over the world and on this call today who are trying our darndest to figure this out. And I really have tremendous hope in where we're going to go next, because we're all really wrestling with it and we're willing to wrestle together. So my insight is that I'm surrounded by a tremendous amount of generosity.
Beautiful. DeEtta, thank you so much. Thank you for your contributions to this network and to our world. It is most meaningful. Thank you, everyone, for joining the Collaborative Leaders Huddle. Remember, leadership matters, but only your teams deliver. Thank you for being the collaborative leaders that you are. Take good care.